Okay, so now that we have the basics of economics, let's look at a free market economy in more detail. The ideas of capitalism grew out of the Enlightenment and are therefore considered classical liberalism. Before the Enlightenment, most economies in Europe were controlled pretty well by the monarchy in order to improve the strength of the nation state. The idea was that the amount of gold and silver in the hands of a monarch meant they could better wage war against opponents, thus making the country stronger. This system is called mercantilism. Mercantilism means that individuals starting a company need to get permission, often known as a charter, from the government. The government would then control who they could trade with, and often these charters gave the private individuals a monopoly. That usually leads to higher prices and less innovation because there's no one competing with them. For example, the owners of the Hudson's Bay Company had to ask the king for a charter to trade furs in Canada, and they were only able to trade with other British colonies. They weren't allowed to trade with their French colonial neighbors. Then Adam Smith shows up, and he argues in his book, The Wealth of Nations, that the strength of the nation isn't in the king and how much gold and silver he has, but in the work the people are doing. He said that all of the government restrictions were just getting in the way of entrepreneurs who were trying to start new companies. By lifting those mercantilist regulations, those business owners were able to innovate and expand their companies in order to make a profit. This era of extreme growth is known as the Industrial Revolution. It's a revolution because it changed the way our entire society works. What's interesting is Smith published a book that led to an economic revolution. At the same time, the Americans were pushing for their political revolution. Both events wanted greater individualism, a focus of the Enlightenment philosophers. Smith coined the term laissez-faire to emphasize the idea that the government should stay out of the way of businesses. Now, there's some people today that believe that Smith was against any taxes because taxes take away profits from the individual. But that's not quite right. Smith would want taxes very low, but he understood there'd be a need for the government to raise revenue for things like a national army that would keep the country safe. He believed that ensuring a peaceful environment encourages economic trade. Think about it. You're not going shopping at the mall if there's a civil war going outside your door. He also said the government needs to make sure there's fair competition to keep the economy running. So the government can intervene to break up monopolies and protect property rights by having laws that everybody must obey. Today, that also includes intellectual property. But that's about it. The government shouldn't be granting charters or telling businesses who they can trade with. Laissez-faire. Leave it be. When people are allowed to pursue their own self-interest, they're going to make sure their business succeeds. In order to do that, they're going to have to produce what consumers want. So it's win-win. The consumer gets what they want, the seller gets the profit to then spend on other goods. This is all known as the invisible hand, another idea of Adam Smith. Because a producer will change an unsuccessful business without needing anyone to tell him to. You don't need a government study to tell you to change. My favorite example of how Adam Smith's ideas work is an experience I had years ago at a farmer's market. I passed this little old lady's stall filled with things she'd knitted, and I saw these little socks that were intended for the bottom of chairs to keep the chair from scratching the floor. I didn't understand why anybody would want such a thing when you can buy little bits of felt that do the same thing without being so obvious. But then I went around the corner and there was another little old lady selling chair socks, and then another. Obviously, there's a demand out there for chair socks. Otherwise, these women wouldn't bother to make them and try and sell them. That's the invisible hand. You don't need government regulations, reports, or subsidies to help the industry along. In other words, laissez-faire. Supply and demand, the invisible hand, will control the supply of chair socks at the farmer's market. Adam Smith explained that there's key characteristics of a classical liberal or capitalist economy. The virtue of self-reliance, initiative, and hard work. You depend on yourself, so you better work hard. No one's going to bail you out. There's the necessity of private property. You want to own things? Well, then that's going to encourage you to compete and participate in the economy so you can get more stuff. That relates to the profit motive. In order to own something, you're going to need to make a profit. That's why we go to work. The price system, supply and demand. It's amazing what prices do. They're going to tell you how well the economy is doing, how high the demand is for a product. Think about Disney movies. Disney purposely keeps some of their movies off the shelf for a period of time so the demand will be high when it returns. That means people would be willing to pay a higher price. The price system also determines wages because the value of a worker is determined by supply and demand. Less workers means you get higher wages. Another idea is competition. It's essential in a capitalist economy because it's the competition that makes the invisible hand work. Consumers benefit by getting better goods at lower prices. Finally, there is going to be an inequality of wealth. In order to compete, there has to be the possibility of becoming rich. And with that comes the possibility of becoming poor. So how does a market economy answer the three basic economic questions? Well, 1, what to produce? Well, that's going to be consumer demand. What do people want? How are you going to produce it? Well, the suppliers are going to figure out how they can compete to get the quality and price they want. And who should get the goods and services? Well, those who can afford it. In other words, the price system. There's several very good reasons why people support this economic system. Number 1, the market gives producers the incentive to produce the goods the public wants. And it provides the incentive to acquire useful skills. Why are you in school right now? Most you would say so you can qualify to get a good job. In other words, acquiring useful skills. There's a wide variety of goods and services available. Just go to any local supermarket. There's the incentive to use resources efficiently to maximize your profits. And competition encourages good quality at lower prices. Look at our phone technology. How far have we progressed in just 5 years because of this competition? Productivity is rewarded, so people want to work harder and smarter for their own gain. It encourages self-reliance because the government isn't there to bail you out. And this is probably what motivates most people. It's possible to become very wealthy. One last thing. There's a few extreme classical liberal philosophers that went so far as to say human suffering is just a natural cycle of any economy. Thomas Malthus felt that populations were growing too fast, and the natural limits on population through poverty and famine were being prevented by charity. Malthus would be opposed to refugee camps that feed and shelter those who are unable to take care of themselves because it only allows the population in these regions to grow. He believed we need to stop giving support to those who are starving in order to control the population. You let them die, there'll be less people, society will benefit in the end. Similarly, David Ricardo believed that government intervention with wages meant that less skilled workers were getting overpaid, which then encourages them to have more kids, which leads to more underskilled workers. He said to just let those less skilled people get paid what they deserve, meaning that they may not survive. But that will reduce the pool of workers, and under the system of supply and demand, if the supply of workers goes down, that means the business will have to pay higher wages. The ideas of Malthus and Ricardo are known as social Darwinism because they feel survival of the fittest fits not just with biological evolution, but with economic success.